You're scrolling on YouTube, you see this 22-year-old kid with a Lambo. He can barely finish a sentence. He doesn't know anything about investing or managing a portfolio, diversification, the Fed, or anything like that. But the kid is dumb rich, right? For lack of a better word. And, you might ask yourself, what exactly is going on with that? Why is it that there are so many people in the world, especially now on the internet, that we can see that are super successful, whether that's through business or through media or through investing, and yet people who are extremely intelligent, have very high IQs, who have advanced degrees, and so on and so forth, and they're having nowhere near that kind of success. And although it's clear to say, let's back up for a second, that what we're seeing on the internet is not always real and also may exaggerate the truth to some extent, and also points out, right, the most extreme examples. And our brains are wired to focus on the more extreme examples, but we'll talk about that in a later episode. Today, we're going to talk about why it is possible that these people who may seem to have a lower IQ, right? We're also being very judgmental upon what we're seeing through a screen, tend to be really rich. So first off, the first thing we want to think about is how we're measuring intelligence, right? Because the way that we've been taught to measure intelligence is through the form of IQ, right? But we all know by now that IQ does not equal wealth. And in reality, what's probably a little bit more helpful in trying to correlate intelligence with wealth is going to be what we call EQ. We're going to break them both down. So we're going to talk about that, IQ versus EQ, why being smart or identifying as smart makes being rich a little bit harder. And we'll talk about the identity feedback loop that James Clear has popularized in his book, Atomic Habits. So first off, what is IQ? IQ has four components. The first one being verbal comprehension. So being able to take words, understand words, and break them down into meaning. The second is going to be perceptual reasoning, which is essentially seeing symbols, seeing things, seeing illustrations, and being able to break those things down and make sense of them. The third thing is memory, so your ability to recall concepts, words, definitions, ideas, and apply them when necessary. And then also, how fast are you able to process information and react to it in that regard? So when you look at IQ and you think about IQ and you associate that with how it could be applied in investing or in business, it's honestly already very clear that this is not a great way to measure someone's likelihood of success, right? But just so that it's clear, there have been plenty of studies that have shown that IQ is not associated with better investment performance. Okay, that's been proven over and over again. It's psychology, so there's a lot of replication errors and things like that you can think about. But listen, the point is going to stand here. We'll talk about it in just a second. So what is EQ, on the other hand? The first thing that EQ is just thinking about self-awareness, right? So understanding yourself, how you feel, being able to assess your inner state. The second thing is self-regulation. So not only can you assess what's going on inside, but also you're able to regulate your responses to what's happening inside, and also being able to basically have control over yourself in terms of consistency, discipline, things of that nature. The third thing is motivation. So are you able to stay motivated when things are not necessarily going your way? That's how we're going to break that down for now. And empathy and social skills are also super important, but we won't talk about that too much today. Warren Buffett, one of our favorites, obviously, he's talked about this often. One of his quotes is that success in investing does not correlate with IQ. Once you have an ordinary level of intelligence, what you need is the temperament to control the urges that get other people into trouble, right? So, pretty self explanatory. Why does EQ matter so much in investing? Having high EQ is going to lead to greater emotional awareness, so controlling your reactions. We talked about in the last episode why it's so important to have control of your reactions and to not react emotionally to what's happening in the market, right? Last episode, we talked about how you do not want to interrupt the process of compounding. And one of the only things that's really going to do that voluntarily, right, where you voluntarily interrupt your process of compounding, is if you're reacting to fear or some emotion that's come up from either something that's happening in the markets, or it could even be something that's happening in your life, which is once again why high EQ is so important. It's not just about money. It's not just about what's happening in the markets. It's about you and what's going on in your life and how you're able to not immediately react to the things that are happening around you. Now, another thing I want to point out here is that in a lot of different realms of life, people are taught to control their emotions. So like that's the word that's used, is you need to control your emotions. And what I've continued to observe is that that is not the right framing to look at your emotions. Trying to control your emotions is something that's going to lead to very poor outcomes, where you've essentially started to bottle things up. They boil up and then you explode. You don't want to control your emotions. You want to control your reactions to your emotions, and you want to be aware of your emotions so that when you have an opportunity to respond and to react, you are reacting from a place of understanding of why you feel the way you feel, what you feel, and then being able to slow down a little bit and come up with ideas. And that's something that is a muscle that you have to train. That is something that becomes a habit over time. And we're going to talk about how you develop habits and why that's important in just a second. Moving on, high EQ leads to patience, right? Being able to prioritize long-term outcomes and realize that things don't happen overnight, and that things that happen on the day-to-day, things that happen from moment to moment, are not necessarily representative of what happens over the long term. Another thing that high EQ can lead to is resilience. So recognizing that when things don't go well, or when you have a setback, you can actually look at this as a learning opportunity and as a potential setup, a potential rung on the ladder that you can use to climb and propel yourself forward. It's really important to not see failures as the end of anything, or to identify with yourself as a failure, right? We're going to talk about identity a little bit later, but that's super important. Another thing that high EQ leads to is consistency, right? Having that self-regulation once again, creating systems, creating habits that you can rely on in order to make sure that you meet your long-term goals. James Clear in Atomic Habits, he actually says, you fall to the level of your habits. You fall to the level of your systems, right? So whatever systems you have, whatever habits you have in place, are going to be the default that you actually fall back down to, right? So you want to make sure that you have really solid systems and really good habits in place. Another idea that kind of aligns with that is a concept in, I'm looking because it's literally sitting right over there, The Mental Game of Trading by Jared Tendler. What he talks about in there is he talks about this inchworm concept. And so what he argues is that you should work on your C game, right? Because if you have your A game, your B game, your C game. If you can improve your C game, right, the worst that you're going to do, then that way, once again, this kind of level of falling to the worst that you could do, falling to the habits and the systems that you have in place, as long as you improve that baseline, that worst case, that worst performance that you can have, then you're actually constantly going to be getting better, and that A game and the B game will continue to take care of itself. But what you really want to focus in is that C game. All right. Humility is another thing that high EQ leads to. Um, you have to understand that none of us know everything. And in reality, the more that we think we know, the more we're going to suffer from some of the biases that we're going to talk about in just a second. So it's really important to stay humble, seek wise counsel, and seek an outside view, especially from someone who's been there before. Because when you're locked in to what you're experiencing, you're actually you've got tunnel vision and you're not able to see what's actually going on. And there's a lot of psychology around that we'll do whole episodes on when it comes to seeking an outside perspective. But for now, just understand, right, that we only know so much about anything. And it's really important to stay humble and to seek outside advice. Low EQ, on the other hand, will lead to overanalyzing situations, right? So, not trusting your gut or your instincts when they give you clear answers. Uh, you may take longer to make decisions, which means more time is being spent not doing something. And eventually, just fewer actions in general are going to be taken. So, once again, this is not saying that having a high IQ leads to these things, but what it is important to understand is that having a low EQ can lead to these things. I'm not saying that having a high IQ means that you have a low EQ and vice versa. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes, right, you're going to notice that there are people who have a high IQ and that is paired with a low EQ. And that is where a lot of what we're going to talk about today really comes up and manifests in this kind of like being smart, being disadvantageous. Now, the second thing that a low EQ leads to is overconfidence. So, failing to recognize what is beyond control. We'll talk about the psychology of that in just a moment. The third thing is giving up. So, if you have a low EQ, you're more likely to give up. You're more likely to lose motivation, not recognizing that what you're going through is just a part of a process. Okay? The feelings that you're feeling are just a part of a process that needs to occur in order for you to get to your goals, whether that's investing success or that's business success in any aspect of your life. Lastly, that I have here is dysregulation. So this kind of all ties in, right? When you uncontrollably react to your emotions, you might do something rash. You might basically fumble a whole bunch of process that you've made. You might give up. You might do things that aren't in your long-term best interest. So moving on, let's talk really quickly about the psychology of being smart, right? Once again, this identity part of it is what's so important. So we all suffer from everything that's on this page. It doesn't matter if you see yourself as smart or not. You have these issues. What the problem becomes is that when you see yourself as smart, these psychological concepts are actually just amplified and get worse. So last episode we talked about loss aversion. Losses feels twice as bad as gains feel good. Okay? So for every loss, you need 2.5 to 3.5 times as much of a win in order to feel that same amount of emotion, if you will. So when you're seeing yourself as really smart, you suffer from also this certainty effect. Okay, so certainty effect is that we overvalue outcomes that are certain and we avoid choices with ambiguous probabilities, even if they have a better potential outcome for us over many different times of playing it out. So, what I'm trying to get across here is that when you're smart, when you see yourself as smart, you're less likely to take a quote unquote gamble, right? Even when, for instance, let's say you have a 96% chance of succeeding. If it's not a 100% certainty, we all suffer from the concept that we're less likely to take that risk just because that 4% buffer is there that makes us know that it's not a certainty. This is a full psychological concept that we will also go into more depth about in the future. But um, that's the basic thing. If we don't have certainty that things are going to go well, we're much less likely than that 4% difference, right? We're more than 4%. We're closer to like 20% less likely to take that gamble. Hope that makes some sense. Um, consistency bias. So when we see ourselves as smart, uh, we want to do things that are consistent with that identity. So even if it's not helpful to us or rational, we're going to do the thing that's consistent with our identity. For instance, this shows up in writing losers down to zero. So when you invest in something and it doesn't go well, a professional investor, someone with a really high EQ as well, is going to recognize, hey, this isn't going the way that I thought it was going to go, and that's okay. I'm willing to, shift, my perspective on what's happening and make the decision to cut a loser. I'm gonna say, hey, I'm gonna get out. Whereas if you see yourself as smart, you're much more likely to hold that loser all the way into the ground because you don't want to sell and actually have to accept and acknowledge the fact that you did something that was wrong, quote unquote wrong. So, lastly, overconfidence bias. So all of us suffer from the tendency to overestimate our skill when things go well and to underweight randomness or luck when things go well. Whereas when things go wrong, we're much more likely to attribute bad luck or randomness to things going wrong than our skill sets, right? So this is just a thing that happens. All of us have it. All of us have to be aware of these things in order to actually combat, these effects that they have on our decisions and so on and so forth. So this is the psychology of being a human being, to be clear. But once again, being smart or identifying as smart simply amplifies the effect that these biases have on our decisions and on our outcomes. So here's what high EQ people understand, and this was outlined in James Clear's Atomic Habits. To change our behaviors, we have three different layers that we can think about. We can think about the outcomes that we desire. We can think about the processes that we implement. And we can think about our identity and who we are. Now, what's common and what's normal is to really focus in on the outcomes that we want to achieve. So you want to make $1 million in the next 5 years. Okay, great. Super helpful to know what your end goal is. But what we can't do is focus on that outcome, right? Oh, I want $1 million in 5 years. Well, how are we going to get there? The best way to actually form our processes that are going to help us get to that outcome is to focus in on our identity. Okay, so does being smart actually help you with getting to your goals of reaching $1 million? Well, we've broken down today a little bit of why that might not be the case. And we're going to talk about what identity might actually better serve you in getting to that outcome so that you can develop processes based upon that identity that actually get you there. So just as a very quick example, if I wanted to be a successful actor and I wanted to play in a big movie, that's the end goal, right? Well, I need to get myself into the mindset of a successful, famous actor. Not necessarily an aspiring actor, not necessarily a talented actor, but the actor that is there, right? So what is the identity of that actor? What is the identity of Tom Cruise? Tom Cruise is one of the best actors ever, right? What are the things that someone who is the best actor ever gonna do? What are they gonna do? They're probably gonna get started really early in their day doing something that's gonna help them with being an incredible actor. That might be waking up and going to the gym, right? That's a process. I'm gonna go to the gym so that I can get my body in shape now, because I am the type of a person who does that. I'm the person who is the best actor in the world. I can't slack off on my diet. I can't slack off on my workout regimen. I can't slack off on reciting lines and making sure that I'm practicing it every second of the day, right? I am that person who has these processes, and now I achieve these outcomes. Fair enough? So, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as someone who wants to find financial success in life, what are some of the ways that you can frame your identity to achieve that kind of success? Well, first off, instead of being smart, consider yourself self aware. Okay? You don't need to know a bunch about this and that. You need to be aware of what's going on inside. You need to be able to regulate yourself, and you need to be able to make good decisions regardless of what's happening on the outside. Instead of being right, you don't want to be right. You want to be a lifelong learner. So there's nothing wrong with getting it wrong. Okay, you want to be okay with taking losses or having failures and using those failures once again as a way to propel yourself into learning something new. Instead of being sure of yourself or super confident, be someone who seeks wise counsel. Once again, it's a huge trap to think that you know, all right, and that you don't need anyone's advice or any help. I personally had a huge blunder in my life by not seeking wise counsel. But once again, just reframe that identity, right? You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be certain. But what you should do is seek advice from others. Instead of being consistent, instead of being someone who you determine to be, true to yourself all the time and never varying or changing in who you are, be someone who is malleable, right? Be someone who flows with the circumstances as far as, hey, I need to make a decision here that's actually going to be better for me, regardless of what I think about myself or regardless of how I identify. You want to be a little bit more fluid. So, what are some practical things that you can do in alignment with this? Focus in on what you can control. You can control your identity, and you can control your processes that are based upon that identity. You cannot control your outcomes. Think about who you want to be. Really think about that. Take time to internalize who you want to be. Imagine, envision the processes and the things that that person is doing on a daily basis, and then you'll achieve the outcomes. Another thing to combat loss aversion and staying motivated, document your wins, okay? All of them, because once again, your losses are clear, they're obvious, they're in your face, they're loud, they're bright. You need to document your wins to combat the fact that those losses are huge, blaring in your mind. Self-regulation, journal your feelings. Okay, the first step to being able to respond appropriately is to be able to actually regulate your emotions by understanding and feeling and being aware of what you feel. Journaling, making your emotions real, helps you to internalize, regulate, and have control. Seek wise counsel, right? So when it comes to making decisions, don't necessarily feel like you have to have all the answers. Ask someone who's been there before. Finally, I just want to tie in some timeless wisdom because I think it's so fascinating. As I've gone down this journey of learning more about psychology and science in general, I've seen how a lot of this information has been told to us a long time ago. And it's not that you replace science or psychology with this wisdom, but you understand it through the lens of the people that have come before us. Just some things to think about here, right? I don't care if you're religious or not. It doesn't really matter. This thinking and the philosophy around some of this modern science has been here for a long time. So just something to think about. My favorite here is the righteous falls 7 times and rises again, right? So being resilient, powering through. Fall 7 times, rise 8 is a Japanese proverb. Clearly, those things are quite aligned. This all goes back to a book that I read not too long ago. It's called The Tao of Physics, the Tao pronounced Dow, depending on where you are, and by Fritjof Capra, and he talks about modern physics and the relation to Eastern mysticism, and how Eastern mysticism rather said a lot of the things that modern physics is only just now discovering. Anyways, books to read along the topic that we just discussed today: The Art of Taking Action, Emotional Intelligence, Atomic Habits, and The Psychology of Money, once again by Morgan Housel. A great read. Anyways, if you got any kind of value out of this, I hope you did. Please be sure to like and subscribe. I'm going to keep putting out much more in-depth psychology videos about how you can optimize your mindset, create better habits, and use that to, first off, go down the right path for you and create a better life for yourself. So, yeah, check out the description to see if there's any links to anything that might be helpful. And other than that, I'll see you next time.